Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she stared at the medical bills scattered across her tiny apartment's kitchen table. The dim light from the overhead fixture cast shadows across the mounting stack of papers, each one a reminder of her 6-year-old daughter Emma's worsening condition. The rare genetic disorder that had seemed manageable just months ago now threatened to take everything from them, including Emma's life. Outside, the autumn rain pelted against the windows of their modest third-floor walk-up in Boston, matching the tears that threatened to fall from Sarah's tired eyes. At 28, she had already weathered more storms than most, losing her parents in a car accident at 20, her husband abandoning them when Emma was diagnosed at 3, and now this, a desperate race against time to save her daughter's life. "Mommy!" Emma's weak voice called from her bedroom. "Can you read me a story?" Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile. "Coming, sweetie." She tucked the bills into a drawer, hiding them away like she tried to hide her fears. Walking into Emma's room, her heart clenched at the sight of her little girl, so small against the pillows, her once golden curls now limp and thin from the medications. "The princess one?" Emma asked hopefully, her blue eyes bright despite her pallor. "Of course, my love." Sarah settled beside her daughter, drawing her close. As she read about fairy tale endings and magical cures, her mind wandered to the conversation she'd had earlier that day with Dr. Harrison. "There's a treatment," he had said, his kind eyes serious behind his glasses. "An experimental procedure in Switzerland. The success rate is promising, but—" He'd hesitated, and Sarah had known what was coming. "The cost is substantial, $500,000 minimum." The number had hit her like a physical blow. Even with her 2 jobs, teaching elementary school by day and waiting tables at night, she barely kept them afloat. Their insurance had already maxed out, and the modest life insurance policy from her parents had been depleted by previous treatments. Later that evening, after Emma had finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah sat at her laptop, desperately searching for options. That's when she saw it, a post on an obscure forum about wealthy individuals seeking marriage arrangements for citizenship or business reasons, offering substantial financial compensation in return. Her cursor hovered over the contact information. The thought made her stomach turn, but Emma's labored breathing from the next room steeled her resolve. What wouldn't a mother do to save her child? With trembling fingers, she typed out her message. "Single mother seeking marriage arrangement. Desperately need funds for daughter's medical treatment. Willing to sign any agreement necessary." The response came faster than she expected from a law firm representing an anonymous client. The terms were simple yet staggering. Marriage for a minimum of 1 year, complete discretion required, and in return, $1 million, with half paid immediately upon signing the contract. Sarah spent the next week in a daze of meetings with lawyers, background checks and negotiations. She never met her prospective husband. Everything was handled through intermediaries. They told her he was a private businessman who needed a marriage for corporate reasons. She would be required to attend certain public functions, but would otherwise be free to live her life and care for Emma. The morning of the civil ceremony arrived cold and clear. Sarah stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the simple white dress she'd bought off the rack. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, her makeup minimal but elegant. She looked like a bride, she thought bitterly, but felt more like a woman walking to her execution. "You look pretty, Mommy," Emma said from her wheelchair, her small face beaming. The child thought they were simply meeting one of Mommy's business friends who was going to help them. Sarah couldn't bear to explain the full truth. "Thank you, baby." Sarah knelt beside her daughter, straightening the bow in her hair. "Remember what I told you. After we meet with Mommy's friend, we're going on a special trip to see some very good doctors who are going to help you feel better." The courthouse was nearly empty when they arrived. Sarah's best friend and neighbor Rachel had come to watch Emma during the ceremony. As Sarah walked into the judge's chambers, her heart pounding, she finally saw him, her soon-to-be husband. He stood with his back to her, a tall figure in an impeccably tailored dark suit. As he turned, Sarah's world tilted on its axis. She knew that face, those piercing grey eyes, the strong jaw, the slight scar above his right eyebrow. 5 years ago, during a summer internship in New York, there had been one magical week. "James," she whispered, as the man she'd never thought she'd see again stared at her with equal shock. James Crawford, CEO of Crawford Enterprises, the man whose heart she'd broken when she'd disappeared without a trace after learning of her pregnancy, stood before her. And in his eyes, she saw not the cold calculation of a business arrangement, but a storm of emotions that matched the chaos in her own heart. Neither of them moved, the weight of their shared past and the billions of questions hanging in the air between them. Through the open door, Emma's voice drifted in, asking Rachel if her mommy was going to be much longer. James's eyes widened at the sound, and Sarah watched as understanding dawned on his face, followed by something else, something that made her heart race with equal parts fear and possibility. The simple business arrangement she'd agreed to had just become infinitely more complicated, and the past she'd tried so hard to leave behind had suddenly caught up with her in the most unexpected way. "Sarah," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion, "we have a lot to talk about." The next 48 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity and carefully controlled chaos. The marriage certificate was signed, Emma was admitted to the private wing of Massachusetts General Hospital for pre-travel evaluation, and Sarah found herself sitting in James's penthouse office at Crawford Enterprises, trying to make sense of how her desperate plan had collided so spectacularly with her past. "Why didn't you tell me?" James's question cut through the elegant space like a blade. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Boston skyline spread out behind him like a glittering canvas. 5 years, Sarah. You disappeared without a word, and all this time—" Sarah gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. "I tried to find you," she admitted, the words she'd held back for so long finally spilling out. "When I found out I was pregnant, I went back to the hotel, but you'd already checked out. The internship program said you'd left for an emergency in Hong Kong. I had no way to reach you. You knew where I worked. Crawford Enterprises was in the middle of a hostile takeover," Sarah interrupted. "Every time I called, I couldn't get past reception. Then I saw the news about your father's death, the company crisis, your engagement to Victoria Chen to save the merger." She swallowed hard. "I was 23, pregnant and alone. What was I supposed to think?" James ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture so familiar it made Sarah's heart ache. "The engagement was a publicity stunt that never went through. I spent months looking for you after things settled down. Your internship program said you'd left no forwarding address. Your college records were sealed. I moved back to Boston when my parents died," Sarah explained softly. "Changed my phone number, started over. Then Emma got sick, and nothing else mattered except keeping her alive." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. James moved to his desk, pressing a button on his intercom. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day." He turned to Sarah, his expression intense. "I want to meet my daughter." The walk to Emma's hospital room was tense with anticipation. Sarah's mind raced with questions. How would Emma react? How could she explain this to her daughter? What did James really want? They found Emma sitting up in bed, her favorite stuffed unicorn clutched in her arms as she watched cartoons. She looked smaller somehow against the stark white hospital sheets, but her smile when she saw Sarah lit up the room. "Mommy, the doctor said I can have ice cream later." Her eyes shifted curiously to James. "Is this your friend who's going to help make me better?" Sarah watched as James took in the sight of his daughter, her delicate features so like Sarah's, but with his grey eyes and determined chin. The emotion that crossed his face made Sarah's throat tight. "Hello, Emma," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm James. And yes, I'm going to help make sure you get the very best care." Emma studied him with the direct gaze of childhood. "You're very tall," she declared, making both adults laugh despite the tension. "Do you like unicorns?" "I've never really met one," James replied seriously, "but I'd love to learn more about them." What followed was an hour of Emma's animated explanations about the magical properties of unicorns, her favorite foods, strawberry ice cream and chicken nuggets, but only the dinosaur-shaped ones, and her dreams of becoming a veterinarian for magical creatures when she grew up. Sarah watched in amazement as James entered her daughter's world with natural ease, his corporate persona melting away as he drew pictures of unicorns with Emma's crayons and solemnly discussed the importance of rainbow manes. Later, when Emma had drifted off to sleep, Sarah and James stood in the hospital corridor, both overwhelmed by the enormity of their situation. "She's perfect," James said quietly, his eyes still on Emma's sleeping form through the window. "All this time I had a daughter and I never knew." He turned to Sarah, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I understand why you did what you did, given the circumstances. But things are different now. I'm different." "James," Let me finish, he interrupted gently. This marriage may have started as an arrangement, but finding you again, discovering Emma, I'm not letting either of you go again. We're going to get Emma the treatment she needs, and then we're going to figure this out, all of it. Sarah felt tears threatening. It's not that simple. You have a company to run, a life I know nothing about anymore. Emma and we're not part of that world. You're my wife now, James said firmly. And more importantly, Emma is my daughter. Whatever comes next, we face it together. He hesitated, then added softly, Unless you regret agreeing to the marriage now that you know it's me. The question hung between them, loaded with years of missed opportunities and unspoken feelings. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. The Swiss clinic was calling about Emma's upcoming treatment. As she answered the call, Sarah caught James watching her with an expression that made her realize this was more than just a business arrangement for him too. Whatever happened next would change all their lives forever, and there was no going back to the careful distance she'd maintained for so long. The past and present had collided in ways she never could have imagined, and somewhere in the midst of it all, her daughter's life hung in the balance. As she discussed treatment protocols with the clinic, Sarah wondered if she'd finally found not just the means to save Emma, but perhaps the family she'd never dared to dream of having. The private jet touched down in Zurich under a crystalline blue sky, the Swiss Alps rising majestically in the distance. Emma pressed her face against the window, her excitement momentarily overwhelming her fatigue. Look, Mommy, the mountains have snow even though it's not winter. Sarah smiled, adjusting her daughter's blanket. The past week had been a blur of medical preparations, travel arrangements, and trying to navigate her suddenly complicated relationship with James. He had thrown himself into Emma's care with single-minded determination, consulting with specialists worldwide and ensuring every detail of their journey was perfect. Now, watching him help Emma down the jet's stairs, supporting her small frame with gentle care, Sarah felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. This wasn't the same man she'd known 5 years ago. The ambitious young executive focused solely on saving his family's company. This James was more mature, more grounded, and the way he looked at Emma made her heart ache with both joy and regret for the years lost. The Swiss clinic exceeded every expectation. Located in a converted chateau overlooking Lake Geneva, it combined cutting-edge medical technology with an atmosphere of peaceful healing. Emma's eyes went wide at the sight of the garden filled with flowering plants and the therapy dogs that roamed the grounds. This is like a princess hospital, she whispered to Sarah as they toured the facility. Dr. Müller, the lead physician, reviewed Emma's treatment plan with them in his warmly lit office. The procedure is intensive, he explained, his English precise and careful. We will begin with targeted gene therapy, followed by a series of specialized treatments over 8 weeks. The success rate is very promising, but money is no object, James interrupted firmly. Whatever she needs. The doctor nodded, but his expression remained serious. It is not just about the money, Mr. Crawford. The treatment is demanding on the patient. Young Emma will need all her strength and all your support. As if to underscore his words, Emma had her first major crisis that night. Sarah was awakened by her daughter's terrified screams, her small body racked with pain. The medical team rushed in, but it was James who reached Emma first, gathering her into his arms and speaking softly to her until the medication took effect. Hours later, when Emma had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, Sarah found James on the clinic's terrace, his shoulders tense with barely contained emotion. I should have found you sooner, he said without turning around. All these years she's been suffering and James, don't. Sarah moved to stand beside him. Though you didn't know, I made sure of that. He turned to face her, and the raw pain in his expression made her breath catch. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me? Did you really think I wouldn't have moved heaven and earth to help? I trusted you too much, Sarah admitted quietly. That week in New York, you made me feel like anything was possible. Then reality hit. You were James Crawford, heir to a billion-dollar empire. I was a summer intern with nothing to offer but complications. When everything started falling apart with your company, I would have chosen you, James interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. If I'd known about the pregnancy, about Emma, I would have chosen you both over everything else. Would you? Really? Sarah challenged. Your father had just died. The company was on the verge of collapse. Thousands of jobs were at stake. I saw the news reports, James. The merger with the Chen family was your only option. An option I never took. His frustration was palpable. I broke off the engagement as soon as I found another way to save the company. I spent months trying to find you, Sarah. Years, actually. Why do you think I agreed to this marriage arrangement in the first place? Sarah stared at him, realization dawning. What are you saying? James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of nervous energy. When your profile came across my lawyer's desk, single mother, daughter needing medical treatment, something made me dig deeper. The age was right, the timeline. I had to know if it was you. The implications of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. You knew? Before the ceremony you knew it was me? I suspected, he corrected, but I wasn't certain, until I saw you walk into that room. He stepped closer, his eyes intense. 5 years, Sarah. 5 years of wondering what happened to you, why you disappeared, if what we had that week was as real as I thought it was. It was real, Sarah whispered, the admission costing her more than she wanted to acknowledge. Too real. That's why I ran. Before James could respond, a nurse appeared at the terrace door. Miss Mitchell, Emma is asking for both of you. They found their daughter awake but groggy, her small face pinched with discomfort. Can you tell me a story? She asked, looking at James with trust that made Sarah's heart clench. Mommy always tells me princess stories, but I bet you know different ones. James settled into the chair beside Emma's bed, his large frame somehow fitting naturally in the space. Well, I do know one story, he began, his voice taking on a gentle cadence. It's about a businessman who met a beautiful, kind woman one summer in New York. She taught him how to see the world differently, to notice the small moments of magic in everyday life. Emma's eyes widened with interest. Was she a princess? No, James smiled softly, his eyes meeting Sarah's over their daughter's head. She was something even more special, a teacher who believed in making the world better one child at a time. But one day she disappeared like Cinderella at midnight, leaving the businessman with only memories and a changed heart. Did he look for her? Emma asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. Every day, James answered quietly. For 5 long years, until fate brought them back together in the most unexpected way. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes as she watched James tell their story in a way that seemed magical to Emma, but held so much more meaning for them. Their daughter drifted off to sleep before hearing the ending, her small hand clutched in James's larger one. The next few weeks brought both challenges and unexpected moments of joy. Emma's treatment was grueling, but she faced it with remarkable courage. James rearranged his entire schedule to stay in Switzerland, running his company remotely and spending every possible moment with them. Sarah watched as father and daughter forged a bond that seemed to strengthen daily. James learned all of Emma's favorite songs, mastered the art of braiding her hair, and could recite every unicorn fact their daughter deemed important. More surprisingly, Sarah found herself falling into an easy rhythm with him, their shared concern for Emma, bridging the years of separation. But it wasn't until the night of Emma's most difficult treatment that everything changed. Their daughter had finally fallen asleep after hours of discomfort, and Sarah stood by the window, emotionally exhausted. James approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She's stronger than both of us combined, he said softly. Sarah turned to face him, and suddenly all the feelings she'd tried to suppress for years came rushing to the surface. I was wrong, she whispered. Wrong to keep her from you. Wrong to run away. I was so scared of disrupting your life, of not being enough, that I convinced myself leaving was the only option. James cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. Sarah, you were never not enough. That week with you showed me what real happiness could be. When you disappeared, he paused, struggling with the words. I threw myself into saving the company because it was the only thing I could control, but I never stopped looking for you. And now, Sarah asked, her heart pounding. This marriage, this situation, it's all so complicated. Is it? James challenged softly. I love our daughter. And you? His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. I never stopped loving you, Sarah. Not for a single day in 5 years. The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and the weight of their shared past. Before either could speak further, a nurse hurried in with news that would change everything. Emma's latest test results showed an unexpected complication. The next hours would test them all in ways they never imagined, forcing them to confront not just their feelings for each other, but their fears, hopes, and the true meaning of family. The news of Emma's complications sent their world into a tailspin. Her body was fighting the treatment, Dr. Müller explained. A rare but serious reaction that required immediate intervention. The next 48 hours would be critical. Sarah barely left Emma's bedside, her daughter's small hand clutched tightly in hers as machines beeped steadily around them. James worked tirelessly with the medical team, leveraging every connection he had to consult with specialists worldwide. "You should rest," he told Sarah late one night, his own exhaustion evident in the shadows under his eyes. "I'll stay with her." "I can't leave her," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from unshed tears. "James, if anything happens—" "Nothing will happen," he said firmly, pulling up a chair beside her. "We're not losing her. Not now. Not ever." He wrapped an arm around Sarah's shoulders, and she found herself leaning into his strength, allowing herself to be vulnerable for the first time in years. As dawn broke over the Swiss mountains, Emma's fever finally broke. Her vital signs stabilized, and Dr. Müller's tense expression relaxed into cautious optimism. "She is fighting," he said, reviewing the latest results. "And winning." The relief was overwhelming. Sarah stepped out onto the clinic's balcony, breathing in the crisp morning air. James followed, and without hesitation, she turned and fell into his arms, both of them holding each other as years of fear, loneliness, and unspoken love poured out. "I thought I was going to lose her," Sarah sobbed against his chest. "Never," James murmured into her hair. "You're not alone anymore, Sarah. Either of you." The days that followed brought steady improvement. Emma's strength returned gradually, her natural resilience shining through. More importantly, the treatment was working. Her test results showed significant positive changes. One evening, as Emma sat propped up in bed drawing pictures with her ever-present crayons, she looked up at James with a thoughtful expression. "Are you going to be my daddy now?" The question caught both adults off guard. James knelt beside the bed, his voice gentle but serious. "Emma, sweetheart, I already am your daddy. I have been since the day you were born, even though I didn't know it, and if you'll let me, I'd like to be your daddy forever." Emma considered this with all the gravity a 6-year-old could muster. "Forever is a very long time," she said solemnly, "but I think I'd like that." She turned to Sarah. "Mommy, is that okay?" Sarah looked at her daughter, their daughter, and the man who had never stopped loving either of them. "Yes, baby," she managed through her tears. "That's more than okay." As Emma's treatment progressed successfully, their small family grew stronger. James officially adopted Emma, and what had started as a marriage of convenience transformed into something deep and real. The press eventually got wind of the story. The CEO who married a single mother, only to discover she was his long-lost love and their daughter, but James handled it with characteristic grace and determination. On their last day at the clinic, Emma now healthy and full of energy, they stood together in the garden where their journey had begun. The summer flowers were in full bloom, and their daughter darted among them chasing butterflies. "I have something to ask you," James said, turning to Sarah. "Our marriage may have started as an arrangement, but I want to do this right." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring that sparkled in the sunlight. "Sarah Mitchell Crawford, will you marry me again? This time with no contracts, no arrangements, just love?" Sarah looked at the man before her, the father of her child, the love she'd never truly forgotten, the partner who had proven himself in every way that mattered. "Yes," she whispered, her heart full. 1,000 times yes. Emma ran over, her eyes wide with excitement. "Is this like in the fairy tales, Mummy? Are we going to live happily ever after?" James scooped their daughter up with one arm, pulling Sarah close with the other. "Even better than fairy tales, Princess," he said, "because this is real." As they stood together in the Swiss garden, a family whole and healing, Sarah realized that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfect timing or fairy tale beginnings. They're about second chances, about the courage to trust again, and about the kind of love that never truly fades. It just waits for the right moment to bloom again. And in the years that followed, whenever Emma asked to hear a story, they would tell her their own, of a businessman and a teacher, of a brave little girl and a summer in New York, of love lost and found again, but most importantly, they would tell her about the power of never giving up on love, even when it seems impossible. Because sometimes, the most beautiful endings come from the most unexpected beginnings.